Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Jimmy Joste was a powerhouse in the oil and gas industry, but he was a weakling when it came to his gorgeous, athletic, longtime lover, Rhonda Glover. Addicted to her sexual prowess and madly in love, Joste gave her homes, cars, cash, and a $350,000 engagement ring. Their 15 years of passion and excess ended the day Rhonda drove directly from a shooting range to the Austin home they once shared. After pumping 10 bullets into him from a Glock 9mm, she stood over Joste's blood-splattered body, and shot him 6 more times, twice below the waist. According to Rhonda, Joste was violent, abusive, and had threatened her life. Here, for the first time, are Rhonda Glover's shocking stories of drug-crazed devil worship and sexual perversity. But in a packed courtroom, prosecutors presented shocking evidence that beautiful Rhonda didn't act in self-defense. It was just hot-blooded murder. Fatal Beauty, with my special guest, the immeasurable and infamous Burl Barer, author of Fatal Beauty. Welcome back to the program, and thank you very much for agreeing again to be on this little wee program, Burl Barer.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show, and having read your book and having had you on my show. You have the distinction of having been on perhaps the most horrifyingly disgusting radio broadcast I've ever been on in my entire life.
Well, thank you very much.
People are still reeling from your book, which is just one of the most shocking books I've ever read in my life.
Oh, my God. Thank you very much. Coming from you, that's very high praise, so thank you. And coming from your vast experience, that's something, too, to shock a person of your unshockable nature, so thank you very much. Now, getting to this shockable story, this is quite a different book even for you, Burl, so I got to commend you on this for just being a very, very surprising book, and it's almost like you got your legal background here on this one, so it's incredible.
Well, you know, it's a difficult thing in the true crime field. There's all sorts of people who read true crime. Traditionally, it's been a female-driven market. More women have traditionally bought true crime books than men.
Right.
And a large segment of people who read true crime books, sadly, don't really care about much except the blood and the gore.
Right.
What I was trained to do as a journalist, and what I think is important to do morally, is if all you do is talk about the blood and the gore and don't put it in any sort of context, it might as well be porno. And porno is entertaining, I'll admit, but you do need a little bit of a plot line. And so the only objections I've had 2 objections to the book. One, that it contains too much important information.
Yeah.
And the other is the style I chose to write it in. I did use a slightly different style on this one. A lot of people watch shows like 48 Hours or 60 Minutes or 2020 that are like documentaries where you have, various people commenting on what's going on. So I thought it would kind of be fun to do a book that was like you were watching a documentary, where you have all these people commenting on what's going on, including Rhonda Glover herself. And this is the first time, I think, that we've had a true crime book of this nature where the killer provides running commentary throughout the entire book.
Yeah, it's definitely, I thought, out of necessity, you created this book as well because of its very unique nature. And then, very much like a very important book where there never can be too much important information, this is so thorough and so much of you're known for your subtext, that's for sure. But this one is very, very necessary, and you can see it building as the book progresses after even the third of the book, and you can see that you're getting you're seeing as what should be a historical time in law, where a case like this in a very, very conservative state like Texas, at a very, I guess, crucial time, because things have developed over the years, even in that state, and looking at this and what is insanity, what a really good examination of what it is, not an emotional examination. And then you have, just to throw in, the complexity is having this woman, like you say, telling the story from her perspective, in and out of probably sanity. So incredible.
One of the reviews of the book that I appreciated, that I think was perhaps it was on the True Crime Book Reviews, said that the reviewer said that while they were reading the book, at first they thought perhaps some of the material I was putting in there was like filler or something, but then they realized by the time they got to the end of the book that I didn't put anything in there that was filler. Everything in this book is there on purpose. It's not just to fill up space. And if you want to skip over stuff that you don't find interesting, go right ahead, but you'll miss what the book is really about. And there's some people, I admit, that really don't care about the social context of a murder. They just want to hear about how many wounds there were, and that sort of thing. But one thing I found especially fascinating about this story, and for those who aren't familiar with it, is that the real reason that Rhonda Glover killed Jimmy Joste never came out at the trial. It never came out in the newspaper. They were never allowed to even mention it at the trial. And it never was. And the only place that you will find the full story on why she killed him is in this book.
Yeah, if there is a why. Yeah, if there is any why, for sure. Well, okay, let's go back on this incredible story, because let's assume that some people don't know this story at all. And so let's go back to the rodeo star, the very beautiful Rhonda Glover.
Oh, she was. And I went and visited her in prison, which was a rather unnerving experience. But she's very pleasant, still attractive, better looking than she appears to be on the TV show Snapped, where she didn't look as good on that TV show as she did when I went to see her. She's still an attractive woman. And as you can see from the photographs, she was drop-dead gorgeous, incredibly attractive woman, very vivacious personality. And my daughter once made a comment that if someone's crazy in bed, they're probably crazy everywhere else too. And that might apply to Rhonda as well. So let's go back to this absolutely beautiful and bright woman, Rhonda Glover. And you have a very wealthy, nice guy named Jimmy Joste. And he'd been going with another woman named Rhonda for about 8 years when he meets this Rhonda too, Rhonda Glover. And he falls for her like the proverbial ton of bricks or several tons of bricks or several large bank balances. Once he experiences Rhonda, he's hooked. His best friend, who we talked to a great deal in the book, Rocky Navarro, as he points out about Jimmy, he and Jimmy had a lot in common. Jimmy was incredibly wealthy. Rocky wasn't, but the two were best friends. There was this vast difference in their income levels, but they shared a great commonality, and that is they were the kind of guys that when it came to women, they weren't into conquest, they weren't into the number of women, none of that nonsense. If they met a beautiful woman who was sexually incredible, they were toast. That was it. That woman could, it wasn't that they could do no wrong, as I said, they could do all the wrong they wanted, and it didn't matter.
Right.
Rhonda could leave Jimmy and go off with somebody else for an extended period of time, run out of money and call him and go, Jimmy, bam, he's right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. And as Rocky said, I'm sure women can see him coming a mile away. They just become subservient to these women. If the women are sexually incredible, and they don't cheat on them, they're loyal to them, and they'll do anything for them. And that's the way Jimmy was with Rhonda. Jimmy was kind of a passive sort of guy, pacifistic, fun-loving. And one of the characteristics is, despite the fact that he had a lot of money, he was very egalitarian. He did not see social differences to people. He wasn't hoity-toity, shall we say. He didn't see himself as better than anybody else. He could hang out with the yard guy or a king or a prince. It didn't make any difference. He'd go to a restaurant. He might invite the valet to have dinner with him. He could relate to anybody. Unfortunately, as time went on, Jimmy started joining Rhonda in some of her more recreational drug experiences. The difference between the two is while they both wound up having predictable amounts of delusions, etc., being as overindulgence, particularly the stimulants, will cause, various forms of temporary psychosis. If you also have mental illness, those psychoses aren't temporary. Therein lies the big difference. Rhonda had ongoing psychosis. Jimmy could get wacko and have delusions, but then he'd stop. He could, like they say, 95% of the people who drink will never be alcoholics. 95% of the people who use recreational drugs will never be drug addicts. Most people who use any kind of drug, maybe they'll use it 2 years and get bored and they'll stop. Most people in treatment are in treatment because someone got mad at them and sent them there. Not because they really needed to be there. She went off several times to mental institutions, treatment centers, etc. Multiple diagnoses of treatable mental illnesses. But unfortunately, Rhonda, as with many people, chose not to take her medications and continued to drink and use recreational drugs on top of her unfortunate mental condition. You put those two together, and you got real problems.
What was she diagnosed with, and what exactly, and when was this? I mean, we're talking about a relationship that spanned 15 years between these two. So let's go back to the beginning. Did she have a history of mental illness when she was a teenager, and then was she diagnosed a little bit later? Or what was the diagnosis? What did she really have?
When she was a young adult, she was already into self-medicating and recreational drug use in high school, etc., which is not unusual. But in the early 90s, etc., she already was having problems with alcoholism and stimulant use, cocaine, etc., which is not uncommon, but being as that she had a diagnosed mental illness, which the diagnosis has changed somewhat. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then later she was diagnosed with what's called psychosis NOS, which means psychosis not otherwise specified, meaning they could not keep her long enough to do an appropriate diagnosis. They could tell she knows you have to have someone under appropriate care or examination long enough to determine, it's like if you were vomiting, but we don't know exactly why. We haven't been able to nail it down. Well, in most states, you can't involuntarily keep someone in a mental institution over, say, 72 hours unless they are either suicidal or homicidal. Threat to themselves or others. Well, as she was neither, even though her mother did a lot of effort to try to get her help, and so did her other friends, they couldn't keep her beyond a certain amount of time. She was in Betty Ford's for her alcoholism. She was out of there, and she can present herself very well. I mean, she's not continually wacko 99% of the time. When I went to, I'll jump ahead, when I went to see her, very charming, very gracious, amusing, and yet I knew that if there were probably certain phrases I could say or topics I could bring up that would trigger. And sure enough, there were certain things I could say, and exactly as predicted by various experts, the eyes would glaze, and she'd be right back perseverating on her delusions. But you can snap her out of that also by changing the topic. So it's it's something that a professional would have to deal with. Sadly, she came to believe some very extreme and dangerous delusions that wound up costing her boyfriend his life.
Now, okay, tell us, before you tell us the delusions, tell us basically what some of her, well, before you talk about the delusions involving Jimmy Joste, tell us just in general some of the delusions she had that seemed to have been, or some of the characteristics that manifested herself in her mental illness. You know, what was it? These grandiose thoughts. Tell us a little bit about her character and the kinds of things she'd be hallucinating or being deluded about.
Mostly, well, in the early times when they were living together in Austin, early on before they split up, before she went to Houston, and before there was any real perceived danger from her, she would call the police several times a week thinking there were burglaries in process in her home, or that there were bodies buried in the backyard, or that bodies in the wall, or that Jimmy had killed people. They asked her why. She said, well, she was reading a true crime book and she saw pictures of one of the suspects and he kind of looked like Jimmy.
Yeah.
To one time, he'd taken their son to the movies, but she thought he killed him and buried him in the, put him in the attic. It turned out they were at the movies. But every time they'd ask Jimmy, are you okay? Are you worried about this? And Jimmy would always say, hey, it's okay. She'll be fine in a little bit. I can always calm her down. I'm not in any danger from her. And no matter what, he would always say, hey, I'm not concerned. She would never hurt me. I'm in no danger from her.
And they would have a designation, the police or emergency workers, too. Was it an EDP or something?
Yeah. They would always note on their EDP, which means emotionally disturbed person. Right. And they would ask, is she a danger to herself and others? And Jimmy would say no. She wouldn't hurt herself. She wouldn't really hurt anybody else. And she'll calm down in a bit. And usually she would.
Right.
It would just kind of go in these fits and starts, and it was he was willing to put up with all sorts of stuff, and then he got kind of almost as wacky as she was for a while because they were both drinking and using together, and they both got delusional, and things got pretty bad, and the Child Protective Services stepped in and wanted to give custody of the child to the grandmother, to Rhonda's mother, because Rhonda was wacko, and Jimmy seemed pretty wacko, too. And right. Rhonda made a deal with her mom that, hey, she'd clean up, and, the mom would keep an eye on her. So Rhonda moved back down to Houston, and Jimmy didn't have any custody whatsoever. They never actually were legally married. And but Rhonda kind of flipped out again and took off with the kid. And that was the problem. Rhonda and her child were missing for an extended period of time. No one knew where they were. And that was a problem.
Wasn't she supposed to hand the child over to Protection Services anyway because she had her restrictions or something about the condition she had broken? Wasn't that the?
Well, yeah, she had broken her condition. She was supposed to turn the child over to her mother. Instead, she took off. And actually, she tried to get across to Canada, across the Canadian border.
Uh-oh.
But the tabs on her car, it was a new car that Jimmy had bought her, and it just had the paper license, and that isn't good enough for leaving the country or getting into Canada. So they turned her back around and said she was on her way home. Well, she didn't come home. And they didn't know where she was. In fact, when Jimmy's body was found, it was Rhonda's aunt who had gone to Jimmy's house looking for Rhonda.
Why was she looking there?
To find Rhonda.
Why was she looking there?
Because Rhonda and Jimmy were still close. Maybe Jimmy knew where she was. Maybe Jimmy had heard from her.
Right. So this is July 25th, 2004, and so who finally? So her friend finds the body, or she doesn't actually find the body.
The aunt, looking for Rhonda and the child, decides to, go by Jimmy's house, and the garage is open, the car is there. She rings the bell, there's no answer. Comes back the next day, there's still no answer. She's a little concerned that, maybe something bad's happened, calls the police. The police go in, and that's when they find Jimmy, quite dead, upstairs in the hallway with several bullets in him, and he'd been dead for a couple days.
Right.
And now they don't know what's happened. They don't know if Rhonda's in danger or if the kid's in danger. No one knows for sure exactly what's going on. Now,
right.
Rocky Navarro, Jimmy's best friend, now he hadn't seen Jimmy in a couple years. They had a little bit of a falling out over Rhonda, actually, over something that had happened. And then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, Rocky gets a beautiful $2,000 gift from Jimmy, a plant thing for his garden. And he calls Jimmy. He says, "Man, this is great to hear from you. Let me take you out." The two guys who've been best friends, who hadn't seen each other for a year or so, spent the afternoon together, bumming around the farmer's market or whatever, having a wonderful time, just like the good old days. And Rocky says, "Let me buy you dinner." So Jimmy says, "Well, okay," because they're like in their shorts and T-shirts and stuff. It was a hot Texas day. So take me by the house, let me shower, change my clothes, you do the same, and give me a call when you're ready, come pick me up, and we'll go out for dinner.
Right.
So Rocky goes home, showers, shaves, gets on the phone, no answer. No answer. No answer. That's because Jimmy's dead.
Yeah.
Finally, and he's not getting what the hell's going on? What's Jimmy pulled on me here? Finally, he gets a call, like a day or so later from the cops saying, Mr. Navarro, Jimmy Joste is dead. We found his cell phone. There's about 15 calls from you. It appears to be you're the last person who saw him alive. Rocky says, "Hell no, I'm not the last person who saw him alive. Whoever killed him is the last person who saw him alive." He was just, he was, really upset. He still is. He was his best friend. And they would, "Calm down, Mr. Navarro, calm down. But, we need to talk to you." Well, it turns out they didn't need to talk to him after all. Their investigation quickly figured out that Rhonda Glover had been in town, had gone to the shooting range there in Austin, just not too far from the house, and gone directly from the firing range to the house, and had shot Jimmy quite dead.
Yeah. How many shots, just for the audience? How many gunshots?
Well, 13. I think the math is a little wrong on the back cover of the book. I think she said it was 13 times altogether. She's basically, depending on which version of the story you want to go with, I'll go with mine. She's upstairs in the upstairs bedroom waiting for him. He comes up the stairs. She's walking down the hall towards her. He gets to the bedroom door. She's waiting for him. She shoots him 4 times, bam, 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 right there as he comes to the entryway of the bedroom. And then she follows as he's stumbling backwards down the hall. She keeps firing. So 6 more times, whatever that poor math. And then he's already dead on the floor. She stands over him and shoots him twice more below the waist, twice in the crotch, and then leaves.
Right.
I believe, and what I've ever bring out in the book, is that he was expecting her and the child. He thought all 3 of them were going to go off to Canada together to start a new life. She tells a story that she went there believing he was out of town to get something out of the attic for a camping trip, and then he came home and surprised her, but she had a gun on her, and he tried to strangle her, so she took out the gun, and it just didn't make any sense, her story.
Wasn't there a version as well that originally she believed that she went into the home because she had called him or knew that he wasn't there, so her story initially had a hole in it?
Yeah, that she called him and he was in Colorado, and then he comes home, and then she hears him come home, and she just sit there and wait for him to leave. Well, if he lives there, he could be there a week. He never leaves the house. No, it didn't make any sense. And even she rehearsed the exact scenario, how she shot him with the guy at the gun. She says, "Well, what if I'm in the upstairs bedroom and the guy is coming down the hall?" I mean, she rehearsed this, had it down to a science. And as I mentioned, they weren't able to bring out at the trial why she did it, the real underlying reason. which was, and your audience will just be drop-jawed when they hear it, so brace yourself.
Well, tell us a little bit. Tell our audience.
Hold it up.
Tell our audience really what so for a lot of people to lay it for rest, because you've really done a good job of succinctly being able to explain this once and for all. What is the law, especially in Texas? But it's a good idea. It gives you have given the thorough overview of what exactly is the insanity definition. What does it mean to be insane, and the hearing itself?
This is very, very important. A lot of people have the mistaken idea that anyone can just claim the insanity defense. I hear this all the time, they'll probably plead insanity. No, you hardly ever see it. Insanity defense is used less than 2% of the time in any case, and it's almost 100% of the time is by mutual agreement of the prosecution and the defense. Insanity is not a medical term. It's a legal term.
Right.
And the term varies depending on where you live. Now, if you're in Canada, I have no idea what the terminology is up there. In the United States of America, it varies from state to state.
Right.
You have in Texas, as you have in California, what's called the McNaughton rule, which goes as follows. If you know it's against the law to kill somebody, you're not insane. So it doesn't matter how crazy you are. If you know it's against the law, you're not insane. Well, that's insane. That's absurd. For example, we have a fellow on death, well, he's been on death row here in California forever, probably will be, killed 10 people in one day because he was nuts and he believed that there was going to be a giant earthquake in California, and the only way to save millions of lives is if there were 10 people who were going to psychically communicate with him, who were willing to give their lives to save the lives of millions. What he was supposed to do was get in his car, drive around town, until one by one those 10 people psychically communicated with him, at which time he would sacrifice their life. Which he did. He killed 10 people in about 90 minutes.
Wow. And they arrested him, and he goes, but it worked. Look, we didn't have the earthquake, did we? Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. Obviously, the man is completely out of his mind, but if you ask the question, is it against the law to kill people? Well, of course it is. But look how many lives we saved. They were in on this with me. It was, because he's crazy. But it doesn't make any difference. Andre Thomas in Texas ate his eyeball in the courtroom.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And then when he was found guilty, he ripped out the other eyeball and ate that one too. And the judge said, yeah, he's nuts, but by the law, he's not insane because he knows it's against the law to kill somebody. Most people who kill people when they're not doing it in an act of passion because they're mad at them, right? Right. It's usually because they think they're responding to a higher power that God told them to. The Lord told me to kill this person. They think they're responding to a divine higher calling, which was in Rhonda's case. She thought she was doing God's will by killing Satan, and they think they believe they're doing the right thing, even though it may be against man's law. They're operating on a higher level. Well, too bad. Under the McNaughton rule, if you simply have knowledge that it's not right to shoot people, then you're not insane. It varies in other states. The law is different, but in Texas, California, and several others, it doesn't matter how mentally deranged you are. If you know you're not supposed to kill people, you're not insane. So they couldn't even bring up her problems.
Now, you do, before you get to the trial, you do bring up the famous authors. Many of them have had them on my program, and you talk about Fred Wolfson, you talk Caitlin Rother, you talk with, tell us about a few people that you do talk to, and what's the question you posed to them about this subject? While we're on this subject, what is their take on it? Because I thought that was very useful.
I thought it would be a fun thing to do, is to ask other true crime authors who deal with this sort of stuff what they think. Should the jury be allowed to know whether or not the person on trial for murder is nuts? Should they be allowed to know that?
Right.
And some of them said, I don't care. And others said, yeah, I want all the information I could get. How can I make an informed decision if information is withheld from me? If this person has been in and out of mental institutions and thinks there's bodies in the wall and thinks God's talking to her, or demons are talking to her, or the dog's talking to her, I want to know about it. However, under Texas law, no, the jury could not be told. They weren't allowed to know about that until it got to the sentencing phase. Then there could only be, very oblique references to the fact that she'd had a history of mental illness. And the reason I wanted to talk to other true crime authors is not merely because I like them and they're fun to talk to, but because of the wide differences of opinion. John C. Mander thought one thing, Stephen Long thought something else, Caitlin Roth felt differently. And it's a controversial topic, especially controversial for the person whose life was taken and the one whose life is at stake. There is a real disconnect. I don't know about in your country, but in the United States of America, there is a real disconnect between what science knows and what people believe on all manner of topics.
Oh, sure.
There is common knowledge and then there's fact. And if you try to disrupt people's preconceived ideas with facts, sometimes they don't want to hear it. I'll just give you a real common one. Have you ever heard that crack cocaine is instantly addicting?
Sure.
The truth is, most people who try it don't like it. The majority of people who do like it and use it quit using it any time between 2 months and 2 years. 95% of the people who use it never become addicted. It has the same addiction ratio as just about anything else, which is 95% of the people who use it never become addicted. And yet that certainly makes for nice headlines, doesn't it? You ever heard of crack babies or meth babies? They're exactly the same as tobacco babies, by the way. The only drug known to really cause massive damage to infants is alcohol. We have fetal alcohol syndrome. All this information is available to anyone who wants to do scientific or medical research. But if you want to read scary headlines or, exploitation press, you can get all sorts of misinformation that unfortunately translates into repressive and draconian laws that put innocent people or, semi-innocent people behind bars or subject to all sorts of mistreatment and prejudice. And it's scary. It's very, very scary. I come from that school of journalism, and I literally mean school. I went to university to study journalism, and I was fairly impressed on me the importance of journalistic ethics. And now in an age when anyone with a keyboard and a blog calls themselves a journalist, and you have radio shows where you have trial by talk show and indictment by soundbite, and people talking on radio and TV shows on who's guilty when no one's even been charged. I don't know how people can get a fair trial.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too. They're just feeding. We don't even have to mention any names, but But anyway, Hillbilly Central there on TV, where it's incredible. It's like if the most simplistic-minded, emotional person got on the air, this person just strokes those kinds of people, and the whole show is like that. You see books now. It's amazing. Kensington will not publish a book that doesn't have the case finished. Well, other publishers will. So the case is not even done, and there's a book out.
And even then, even when the case is done, now Caitlin Roth, who I admire greatly, in fact, her book, Poison Love, is being re-released soon about the case in San Diego. Now, that's a real wild one. There were 2 books on that case, and the person was found guilty, and then turns out the prosecutor framed him.
Wow.
Why? So they could be heroes in a true crime book.
Wow, yeah, crazy story, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing,
I mean,
yeah.
You know, it's a scary thing. I had Michael Griesbach. I don't know if you've had him on your show yet.
Yeah, I just had him on last week, actually. It was great. His book was amazing. It was
great
like surprise ending.
Amazing book. Yeah, great book, great guy. And he was talking about, he was watching one of those TV shows where they were talking about the case he was doing. And they were talking about buckets of blood. He's going, what buckets of blood? They're talking about things that don't exist.
Yeah, well, that's journalism, the state of it. It's not too accurate. There's no one to check on it.
Well, at least the Canadian government had the good sense to, you still got that law up there where it's against the law to tell a lie and call it news. In America, went to the courts on that. We have this network down here, Fox News.
Yeah.
And went to court. And they said, yes, they admitted that they make stuff up, but they said it's protected under a First Amendment of free speech, that we can lie and call it news, because that's free speech. And they won on that basis, which is a mixed blessing. Yes, I'm a big fan of free speech, but I think that Canada's got the right idea where you can't call it news if it's not true.
Yeah, but the thing is that to actually wind its way through court would take about 15 years. Most people would have passed away by that time here. Nothing gets done very quickly here, and then it's appealed and then pondered upon, and then an inquiry about the outcome, and then. So don't hold your breath on that. If you're not too satisfied how it works there, be prepared to be not so satisfied here. We haven't even got into, and we'll wait till the very end, but. Haven't gone into the comparison. I will give you a case here that the psychiatrists have assured the victim's mother that this guy should be manageable in the community in 5 years, and you won't believe the difference. Again, we follow the McNaughton rule, and we've had an evolution certainly in this kind of defense, and certainly insanity defense doesn't work very often, but we've made some advances that you would be concerned with. It's sort of the opposite. We just have sort of a polar opposite from your system. It's very interesting.
Well, it's very strange. I'm working on a book right now that I'm actually writing for somebody else, a ghost book, shall we say, not supernatural, but I'm writing it, for somebody else. And 200 years ago, if you wanted to have someone involuntarily committed, all you had to do was get about 3 people to say, oh, they should be put away. And if they object and say, I shouldn't be put away, that's considered proof they should be put away.
Sure.
Well, they've made that far more difficult to do that, of course, with people with mental illness, but they've made it real easy to do that with people who you can say are drug addicts or alcoholics. I could say, Dan Zupansky should be put away because he's a recalcitrant drug addict and alcoholic, and I got 3 people who say so. And they'll say, Dan, are you? And you say, no. Well, your fact that you say no is taken as proof that you are, and therefore you could be put away.
Yeah.
There are many states who have that now. It's very scary, very scary.
Now, with this, getting back to Rhonda Glover, there is a very, very important person in this trial here. And we may be jumping ahead, but this is something that happened a while back, before the murder itself. And this is Patricia Swenson. And what did she tell police? And what did Rhonda know about her? And she apparently called her. And what did they talk about? What was that conversation about? And who was Patricia?
Patricia Swenson and Rhonda were good friends, on and off, for many, many years. And Rhonda and Patricia had gone out one night, and Rhonda had told Patricia her big plans for Jimmy, that she was going to seduce him and then cut his penis off and burn the house down.
Why?
Well, because of the same reason she basically killed him, because he was Satan, because he was in league with the devil, and he and George W. Bush were having homosexual sex with clones and conducting pagan sacrifices in the cave under her house, and chopping up little children and serving them in barbecue restaurants. The usual reasons.
Yeah.
And so Patty goes, ooh. And then, well, there was a fire up there in the area of Jimmy's house, and Patty thought, oh, my God, she'd really done this. It turned out that wasn't it. Well, when Rhonda finally did kill Jimmy, and Patty was going to testify that one of the things the prosecution was going on is that she'd had this in mind for a long time.
Right.
She'd been planning this. Well, the fact that Patricia could say, well, yeah, we had this conversation at such and such a restaurant way back in June of whatever, where she was planning to kill him.
Right.
Well, Rhonda found out about this and called her on the phone and said, you don't remember that conversation because you were drunk that night. We were at such and such a restaurant, and I said I was going to kill Jimmy. I mean, if she didn't remember before, she does now.
Yeah, she just acknowledged it. Yeah, pretty savvy.
Yeah.
Pretty smart.
It was. It was the whole thing is so sad. I mean, laugh about it. It is so sad. It is sad for Jimmy because he's dead, and all of his friends and family. It's sad for their child. They have a son, for heaven's sakes, about 16, 17 years old. And I heard from him, and he said, no one knows what it was like, except me. You can, some people portray her as a gold digger. No, she wasn't. She could have, filed child support. She was getting about $10,000 a month from Jimmy anyway.
Well,
she told me when I was visiting, she said, my son says, Mom, why don't you just admit you're crazy? And she says, because I'm not. And I didn't realize she still had these same delusions, bless her unfortunate heart.
Yeah, because it did have the benefit of having her not doing. See, here's the thing that I think we got to explain too, because this is part of the law as well. If you have a certified mental illness, that'd be one thing and would help in at least the penalty phase. But if you're not taking your medication, plus you're not complying with that order, and plus you're doing illicit drugs on top of that, you really are not going to qualify for any kind of reduction or any credit at all.
And yet, the use of illicit drugs by people with mental illness is symptomatic.
Sure.
Symptomatic. I mean, that it's like that's one of the characteristics.
Sure.
It's like arresting a drug addict for having drugs. I mean, well, duh.
Yeah.
It's like arresting an alcoholic for drinking. I mean, what do you expect? Or arresting someone with indigestion for having an upset stomach. They go together. And so, but unfortunately, under the law, if you have a mental illness and you've also been drinking or drugging, then it negates any compassion. Well, the use of drugs and alcohol by people with mental illness is far more common because it tends to be used as a form of self-medication. So, dealing with what's real is so difficult for people. It's like how we think things should be or how other people should behave compared to what's real life. The disconnect is so great. It's tragic. But anyway, I almost lost track there, whatever the question was. But
she had a competency hearing, so she was declared not competent at first.
This is so bizarre. You explain this one to me. When she was arrested, it was determined she was not under the influence of any drugs or alcohol whatsoever. She was clean and sober. She was also out of her mind. Right.
Right.
She goes to the mental hospital after she's arrested because she's blatantly nuts. They have her, and they have a competency hearing, and she's found not competent to stand trial because she is delusional, completely delusional.
Right.
But she's delusional when arrested. She's not under the influence of any drugs that will give her temporary psychosis. It's fairly reasonable to assume she was delusional when she pulled the trigger 13 times the day before, right?
Sure.
She's not competent to stand trial. They send her off to the mental institution. She gets a new lawyer. They give her some drugs to calm her down, and then this is what they do. They say, it's dangerous for you to mention the delusions. Can you not mention them if your lawyer tells you not to? by that, and she told me, because she said, I was told it was dangerous. Burl, it's dangerous for you, too. She was worried that I would be hurt if I mentioned them.
Yeah,
when they told her it's dangerous, she thought she meant that someone might come into the courtroom and kill her or bump her off if she mentioned these things.
Yeah.
So she agrees to not manifest the symptom of her incompetence. By agreeing to not look incompetent, she's declared competent. She was no more competent to stand trial when she stood trial than the day she was found incompetent. The only difference was she agreed to hide her incompetence.
Now, we'll get to that. The thing is I wanted to mention as well is that because there's a lot of this information about previous mental illness diagnosis and, of course, mounds of evidence to support that she has this particular odd behavior with police contact beforehand, her lawyer has to go with self-defense. It's not an insanity defense for the audience. It's self-defense.
Absolutely no choice. The lawyer couldn't say, listen, my client's been nuts for years. She has this ongoing delusion that Jimmy Joste and George W. Bush are having homosexual sex in the cave under her house with clones and are sacrificing children and putting them in barbecue sauce. And she thought she was killing Satan and put her in a mental institution for the rest of her life. He couldn't do that. He couldn't even mention it. So instead, he had to say it's self-defense, which was easily disproven. And she is in prison and receiving absolutely no mental health care whatsoever.
Now, before we get to that, she made quite an appearance at the trial itself. She took the stand. If people don't know, that's quite, a fairly rare occurrence. How did she conduct herself?
Yeah, she doesn't have to. Yeah.
No.
I think the reason her lawyer had her do that is he kept trying to get the door open legally to address these other issues.
Sure.
And she's such a loose cannon, and she was still incompetent no matter what the court said, that if he could put her on the stand, kind of like that movie with Richard Gere and Edward Norton, where he puts the guy on the stand so people can see his nuts.
Sure.
I think that was a technique. I think if he figured that she would say things and do things that would cause legal doors to open, that they could bring out the fact that she had been diagnosed mentally ill for years.
Yeah, and they could say they never planned it. They never planned it. It just happened.
Yeah, but unfortunately it didn't work. She did.
Well, how did she conduct herself at the beginning of the testimony, and how long did it last?
Well, she got up there and she started to say she was going to faint, and then she puts her head on the table and this, that, and the other thing, and she cries and weeps and moans, and she talks about how much she feared Jimmy and how she had to protect herself, and he grabbed her by the throat. But then, under cross-examination, when the prosecution goes to talk to her, bam, her demeanor changed so fast. All of a sudden, she was the other Rhonda. She was cold as ice and snappy and,
Yeah.
I mean, they saw the change. The jury saw the change, but it didn't work in her favor. It didn't come up like, there's something wrong with this woman. It's more like, what was this nonsense of her crying a few minutes ago when she's cold as ice now?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it particularly amusing, too. She said, I'm going to go into a state of shock, kind of like she was stalling. It seemed like, to me, just following the dialogue, that she was stalling for time a little bit, and they'd have to press her, okay, answer the question. I'm going to faint. I'm in a state of shock.
She didn't know how she was going to answer. I mean, no matter how much her attorney may have rehearsed her, he had his own problems dealing with her, because all you have to do is say cave or bubble gum or homosexual or, and bam, she's off. She's off and running.
Right.
She's right back there that there's child sacrifices in the cave and, she's gone.
What I wanted to ask you, and I know if the audience doesn't know, that the refrain from the prosecution is that they don't have to prove motive. But isn't
That's right.
it isn't in a capital case like this, and in a serious murder case, isn't the absence of motive, isn't that something that the lawyer was quite good in here? At least you depict him as being pretty capable, and he fought pretty hard for his client. But isn't that, I mean, even though it's they don't have to prove, but isn't the lack of any reasonable motive kind of proof that,
well,
you know, that she's not...
They were able to show self-defense, at least that she supposedly that she had things against him. The prosecution tried to say that she killed him because she was tired of it, which doesn't make any sense. But it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is she pulled the trigger 13 times at an unarmed and innocent man who posed no threat to her whatsoever.
Right.
She killed him. He posed no threat. He loved her. He loved their child. He thought they were going away together to live happily ever after in Canada. Instead, she killed him. And now it's my personal thing. She shouldn't be out walking the street. If she's mad at me today, I don't want her having a Glock 9mm and coming after me.
Sure.
Yes, she's pretty. Yes, she's charming. And I'm glad she's somewhere where she's safe and she's not hurting anybody. I think it would be in her best interest. Now, I don't know what the mental institutions are like, so whether it's better to be in prison or better to be in a mental institution. It depends on where you are and what they're like. I do know she told me that my book has caused her some problems in the prison.
Really?
People read the book. And, you know, she kept telling me that she's never been mentally ill. She's never had a mental diagnosis. And, of course, that's not true, but that's what she keeps saying and believing. And they thought in prison she was just fine. Well, of course, now if they're reading this book I think it would be in her best interest to have some mental health examination, have some mental health treatment. I'm not a doctor, but I think it would be in her best interest.
Yeah, well,
I think she would be a happier and healthier person.
You know, there's big controversy here, and I won't go into it here, but just for frame of reference, what do you think should happen to a person like Rhonda? You clearly, at least it seems, that you're siding with that she's clearly should fit the definition of insane, and it should certainly be treated in a mental institution. But in this country, it's a little bit different because we're letting everybody out. Like, I mean, seriously. And especially insane people seem, at least the psychiatrists here, believe that with medication and with time, that certainly almost anybody, and I mean anybody, can be released. Now, what do you think personally in terms of release? In terms of if they did rehabilitate her mentally, would then she stand trial again and pay for it, or what is your idea?
No, that would be ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. That's like when they give people medication to make them competent enough to be executed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
I love that inclusion.
Again, there's all sorts of, like a very good friend of mine in Walla Walla, Washington, Dr. Steve Rubin, is one of the leading experts on sexual offenders, especially teen sexual offenders. And as he points out, if it's a former sexual offender, and situational sex offenders, especially situational child molesters, are not pedophiles. They respond incredibly well to therapy. Most of them never, ever do it again. Caught once, have treatment, and are exemplary citizens the rest of their lives. The biggest danger they face upon being released and trying to get into society is people hounding them, berating them, insulting them, and putting them under so much stress they crack, which is entirely different than a pedophile. It's entirely different than a situational child molester. But a situational sex offender responds well to therapy, and usually, if they're lucky enough to get it, they're not going to cause a problem. Where you have a problem is where you have an offender and all you do is lock them up for a year in a county jail and then let them out. And you don't give them any help. I mean, this comes into this whole weird disconnect between what people believe and what's true. If I'm mentally ill, I'm going to behave inappropriately. If you treat me, and if I get medication, and if I take let's like the prosecution said in the Rhonda Glover case, there are millions of people who are bipolar and have various forms of psychosis who get up in the morning, they take their pill, and they're fine all day long. And that's a fact. She chose not to take her medication.
But can the same be said? But can the same be said for those people that go over the line? Just like you make the distinction in your book, I found it very interesting. Again, it's been a new one for me. How clear it was put in your book. There's a sociopath, which may be your boss, who's a real prick, but then there's a psychopath, the worst of that sociopathic designation. So, what are you saying here in terms of this person can be treated? But there's a huge difference between the very harmless schizophrenic and the person that commits this kind of murder. Is there not a distinction? And what do you do with this person? You treat them, but can you ever let Rhonda Glover out? Say she was responding.
Well, see, that would be something. It's highly individualized. It's been suggested that people such as Rhonda Glover would be, because they committed murder, a very hot-blooded or murder in that case, would perhaps be sentenced to life in a mental care facility.
Right.
Just as if they committed it sane, they would spend their life, if found guilty of murder, in a prison that she would spend, or whatever the sentence was, that they would spend the equivalent sentence in a mental hospital, which is maybe worse or better than being in a prison, But the idea is to protect people. People think of terms of prison in terms of punishment and revenge, and punitive model, which is the punitive model has always been found to be the least effective way of affecting any change in anybody. If you punish people for lying, you know what happens? They lie more. If you reward people for telling the truth, they become more honest. So we have this whole ass-backwards thing of punishing people into change, which doesn't work. You put people in prison to protect us from the predator people. If you're going to put them, you hopefully are going to do something that will reduce recidivism, them coming back to prison. Except the problem there is, and believe me, I worked in prison recidivism, as did Timothy Leary years and years ago, where he worked on a program that reduced the odds of someone coming back to prison. And he goes and he talks to the warden and says, we have this program that seems to be working very well on reducing recidivism. And the warden says, let me show you something. And he shows them the plans for the new prison, which is larger and employs more people. He says, listen, the prison industry is based on repeat business. We don't want these people not coming back. We want these people coming back.
Well, I think you're talking about kind of slightly two different things, because I know what you're speaking of. The prison industry is filled up with a bunch of dummies that were never represented at trial. It's not like a bunch of mobsters and the most hardcore criminals were caught and then put in prison, and then those streets are safe for a while. No, it's a bunch of dummies are in there. A bunch, not so much dummies, but they're costing us more.
They can get.
They're costing us more money than they can steal in a year. They're not even ambitious. But they do.
And most of it's victimless crimes, drug crimes, young people arrested for drugs, minorities. I interviewed the guy from the FBI, foreman of the FBI, who brought crack cocaine into South Central L.A. One of the reasons being so they continue having a prisoner class to arrest.
Yeah.
That was the plan. I mean, people don't want to hear it, but, hey, what's real is what's real.
Well, the thing is, and really I don't want to get onto this too much, but just for comparison, we have a guy, you probably heard about this, and I can't see how you didn't. But anyway, this guy was an Asian guy named Vincent Lee, and L.I., and this guy got on a Greyhound bus outside of Winnipeg.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, so the bus beheading and cannibalism.
Oh, and he wanted to kill himself.
Pardon me?
I read about, and when he got medicated and realized what he'd done, he begged to die.
Yeah. The thing is, though, that's interesting, and certainly he was a clear-cut case of being insane, and he was found not criminally responsible, is what they call it here, I guess, which was called insane before. Now, the thing is, he's in a mental institution that has no fences, and within 2 years, he has now been. They have a plan for him to go out for escorted walks in a community where there's homes across the street where there's no fences, and these people escorting him have no guns. That was after an outcry because.
Does he pose any threat? Does he pose any threat whatsoever?
The thing is that he is, of course, less delusional from the medication. But what I'm saying is that they've already said, and I don't know how they conclude to this, but this is the kind of mentality we have here. You may find it welcoming, I'm not sure, but they've said to the parent of the victim that this guy will be likely out in about 5 years on medication. So that's where we're at in terms of this evolution of the idea that, okay, he's not criminally responsible, but then now we can fix him. And I say, I want to see this medication.
Possible. You know, it's very, very possible. We get into things of, oh no, that can't be so, that can't be so, and it can be so. It can. I mean, I'm surprised the guy hasn't killed himself because he wanted to. When he realized what he, imagine what if you woke up and realized you'd done that.
Wow.
What would you do? I mean, you couldn't live with yourself. The guy couldn't live with himself either. I mean, he's probably most ardent desire for an extended period of time was to kill himself. You know, God, could you the living with having done that?
But he still might be in a state of delusion. That just, you know, who knows? I mean, just like his doctors would know. Well, the thing is I just find it awfully interesting that a doctor can conclude, you know, with any kind of certainty that this guy can be out in a short period of time without. I mean, the thing is, people say, well, what if they don't take the medication? And I just say, what kind of medication do you have? Because I'm just not quite sure everybody can be treated. There are some kinds of medication where they give them a shot, and the shot lasts 90 days to 6 months, depending on time. But I was just reading, in fact, I think I mentioned in the book, the fellow who escaped from the mental institution. Did he really pose a danger? Well, no, not actually in terms of like killing anybody, because he just wanted to get the hell out. But in terms of that kind of behavior, no. I've got friends who are schizophrenics. People are always afraid of schizophrenics. Usually schizophrenics are harmless. These people watch too many movies. Right. They give him a shot because he may not remember to take a pill every day. Well, if he gets a shot, the shot lasts 90 days, 6 months. You know, he's fine. You know, there's just because we don't know doesn't mean someone else doesn't know. You know, just because we're not an expert in auto mechanics doesn't mean that someone doesn't know how to fix a Lamborghini. Just because we don't know about cancer treatment doesn't mean there's someone who does. There's someone who doesn't know about treating, you know, different kinds of illnesses. Projectile vomiting is also upsetting, but there's people who know how to treat it. Well, you know, that's the thing, but you do have all the emotion of the police and the media and also the victims' families. And there's nothing worse than a combination of ignorance and emotion. Yeah. And so you figure you can combine my ignorance of a topic with my emotion on a topic, and I'm going to be a babbling idiot. So don't pay any attention to what I say. But if we bring in someone who knows what they're talking about, who's who's very knowledgeable, and they say something, and if my emotions are high enough, I'm going to ignore what an expert says anyway. You know? Oh yeah, we all do anyway. I mean, that's always the thing. So he's like, well, how do you know? That's one of the logical fallacies. You know, the absence of information isn't proof of whatever the absence of information is. You know, well, the fact that we don't know proves such and such. No, it doesn't. You know, well, see, how do we know? Well, ask. You know, that's how you know. Say, excuse me, why is this person who is a former child molester released to a halfway house? And you ask them, you say, because they were a situational molester. They had nothing to do with sex and nothing to do with children. It had to do with a stress response. They've had complete therapy. I've staken my professional reputation on the fact that if you leave them alone, they'll never do it again. Well, I guess, you know, you're always going to have 20 years of my life as a, you know, it's like going to you as a journalist. It's like, how do you know what comma goes there, smarty pants? Yeah. And I'm sure too. You weren't born with this open mind. You went through this evolution like all of us do when facts are staring you right in the face, and you got to throw in as a journalist. You've got to be that kind of journalist, and I know, especially as an author, that's why you've won the Edgar Award, because you, and especially it's evidenced by this book, you've got the details and you're given the facts and you're trying to present the case that certainly this woman, if there is anyone that fits the definition of insanity, and that's why she killed.
Well, but she doesn't fit the legal definition in Texas.
That's right.
Because insanity is a legal term, not a medical one.
Yeah.
And this is why people can spend hours talking about this book if they don't think it's filler. Now, there's actually on Amazon, someone said, what did they say? A horribly, terribly written, boring book, filled with all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the case. Well, that person probably isn't going to enjoy any of my books.
Yeah, or any book, maybe.
Or any book, for that matter, with a word over 2 syllables.
Well,
but what I am happy about is that people whose opinions I do count as important, such as other true crime writers or journalists, like my work. And I think Gary C. King had a great comment. He said, "The only review that really matters is the one from your editor and publisher when they say, 'Will you write more books for us?'"
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and the thing is too, it's just obviously there's a certain type of person that reads true crime, and I think occasionally when they get these bad reviews, because yourself, for the vast majority of the time, people don't really communicate with you for the amount of books you've sold. They don't really personally communicate with you, but you keep selling your books, and you get a call from the editor. So the thing is, that's what I find is I sell books all the time, and I get a very few comments from people. But the thing is, the vast majority of people are getting an education, and the true crime market is underestimated how smart and savvy these people are.
What we're seeing now, Dad, is what we're seeing now for the first time is men and we've always had true crime. We've had women and white collar educated women reading them. Now, for the first time, men are reading true crime.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. So it's a whole other segment of the market, and as you know, because you write it, you know about it. It is not an easy thing to write. It's emotionally demanding. It can really play on your nerves, and you have to do a lot of research. And it's not easy stuff to write, but I'm of the feeling that if you can lift the victim's life to a level of sacrifice, and if people can learn from these books, lives can be saved. And it generates discussion, as we've certainly done with the case of Fatal Beauty, which, by the way, folks, is available in both paperback and ebook. It stimulates discussion, and discussion is always healthy.
Yeah, and it's great, too. The true crime audience is very appreciative, I think, of the information that you're able to provide. Some books really don't necessitate going through too much of a legal drama because the parts of the story that they have either access to or more interesting are somewhat outside. But in this particular case, you've got a really good examination. You show other cases. I found it, amazing amount of. I love it like a historical aspect of it, where you're talking about in Texas in 1974, you could get the death penalty for rape and break and enter, life without parole. So very interesting how the times have changed a little bit.
Well, it all depends on I say if people like that sort of stuff, if they like a sense of perspective historically, socially, culturally, they'll like my books. If they don't, they won't like this one, and they probably won't like some of the others. And if they don't like this one, I say, well, Virginia, you probably might like Murder in the Family, but the Murder in Alaska, which is a totally different sort of thing, or Body Count, which we talked about, the Spokane serial killer. But this is a book that does cry out for context. It does cry out for what does this mean? What does this tell us about ourselves, our history, and how we face these things? And that's the way I approached it.
Yeah, no, it's been a great yarn. Fatal Beauty, for those people listening, Edgar Award-winning Burl Barer, and make sure you check out True Crime Uncensored on Saturday afternoons on Outlaw Radio, the premier true crime interview program, the best authors.
And you've been on it.
And I've been on it, so it was a blast too. It was the greatest interview I've done, so it was a blast. It really was.
God, what a disgusting story it is. Folks, buy his book, you'll be shocked.
I guarantee you. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much, Burl, for coming back on the program. I wish you all the best of luck with Fatal Beauty, but I'm sure it's going to be another bestseller because it's a great book and a thrill ride of a read. So people have been listening to the program. Pardon me?
I'll quote you on that.
I'll quote me on that. Oh, yeah, for sure. Anyway, thanks very much, Burl. Have yourself a great evening.
My pleasure. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You've been listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors have written about them, and with my special guest, Burl Barer, with his book, Fatal Beauty, the rodeo star seductress killer, Fatal Beauty with Burl Barer. Have a good evening. Good night.